Before I got started on the discussion, the presentation tonight, I did just kind of want to just go over some basic definitions for newer members, for people who are, guests who are attending to kind of test the waters. So seasoned members, just hold on tight. I promise we'll get through it quickly. Just some quick definitions though. Identity politics are politics in which groups of people having a particular racial, religious, ethnic, social, or cultural identity tend to promote their own specific interests or concerns without regard to the interests or concerns of any larger political group. Fairly certain we're all pretty aware of identity politics, but still always I don't ever want to make assumptions about people's knowledge. Class reductionism are political policies and strategies that prioritize broad economic reform to the exclusion of addressing issues facing specific minorities. And then the concept of hegemony is fairly basic as well, but those are mechanisms and dynamics describing how a determinate group comes to organize its ruling or its organization, in our case, like a party, a political party at multiple levels, such as the political, economic, social, cultural, and linguistic areas. So just wanted to go ahead and go over that. All right, liberal versus revolutionary identity politics. A recent resurgence of the debate on identity politics has been making its way through popular discourse. Although we can immediately recognize these positions as reactionary and divisive, it is important to understand what identity politics are, manifestations of them in both liberal and leftist spheres, how capitalism weaponizes identity politics to divide the working class, and how a combination of metaphysical and material analyses can provide us with the strongest stance against this weaponization. This week's material from Josefina Martínez and Asad Haider examine all these facets and demonstrate why a materialist approach to identity politics is crucial to overcoming the most insidious iterations of them. For establishment politics, identity politics are used to shut down conversations about class and economic inequality. Martinez's article describes how Professor Asad Haider, a founding member of Left Voice, in his book Mistaken Identity, analyzes the consolidation of an elite within the anti-racist movement of the 60s and 70s, which had adopted strong elements of anti-capitalism and class struggle. This group of privileged individuals eventually abandoned these elements of the movement, untethering it from its grassroots base and leading to the absorption of the movement and language by the Democratic Party. After this co-optation, the strategy employed by liberals necessarily painted the issue as an individual one instead of systemic. Under this guise, racism is framed as being experienced and consequently addressed on an individual level. This manifests itself as employers and government agencies embracing programs of diversity and inclusion, multiculturalism, and individual action instead of contending with the unifying issue of class struggle. Martinez notes, quote, "It thus becomes common sense on the left that the most important thing is for everyone to check their privilege, as if oppression could be reversed by an exercise of individual self-awareness," end quote. Multicultural representation within ruling class structures is celebrated as evidence of the benevolent and progressive potential of capitalism. For example, Barack Obama is held up as a prophet of what minorities can accomplish within capitalist society if they just behave and work hard enough, despite being one of the most well-documented imperialist war criminals in US history. I am fond of reminding anyone who will listen, and even ones that won't, that representation in oppressive structures is not liberation. And I apologize, I forget who originally stated it, but someone in our study group last Sunday put it perfectly. A fantasy of inclusion is a technique of exclusion. which is perfect. I like it. Picasso. Anyway, the legacy of Obama serves a dual purpose to the ruling elite. Not only is he used as a deflection from the systemic nature of racial capitalism, the ascension of a Black man to the presidency in a country founded on Black slavery is also leveraged as a means to strengthen electoral support from minority communities. Weaponized identity politics is also an extremely effective tool in dividing the working class among racial, gender, sexual, religious, and cultural lines. During the recent protests against unlawful and brutal detainments by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, popularly known as their acronym ICE, a section of Black Americans refused to protest with their Latin American counterparts, many claiming this wasn't their fight and pointing to anti-Black sentiment within the Hispanic community as further justification for their collective abstention. On the weekend of June 20th, a two-day heterosexual awesomeness event was held in Boise, Idaho, in protestation of Pride Month. And on Juneteenth, Beyonce, a notable member of the capitalist multicultural elite, wore a shirt celebrating the actions of the famed Buffalo Soldiers against Indigenous peoples, who were, according to the script on the shirt, quote, the enemies of peace, order, and settlement, end quote. The action has fanned racist rhetoric emanating from both Indigenous and Black communities and has reignited the same historic resentments which have enabled white supremacy to dominate both groups for hundreds of years. As Marx stated, quote, this antagonism between the proletarians is artificially nourished and kept alive by the bourgeoisie. It knows that this split is the true secret of maintaining its power, end quote. None of this is to suggest that leftist discourse has somehow transcended or even escaped identity politics. After significant popular shifts toward conservatism after the emergence of Trump, political strategy in certain segments of the left shifted toward wooing back voters with campaigns of our workers first, proposing economic reforms within a nationalist framework and painting social issues as divisive to the electoral base. Martínez summarizes a review of Haider's book by DSA member Melissa Nazchek, where Nazchek accuses Haider's conception of insurgent universality as abstract anti-capitalism inadequate as a means for unifying the working class, and suggests modest economic reforms such as affordable medical care, quality education, and respect and security in the workplace as a solution to the barriers presented by racial identity politics. The irony of Nazchek's accusations of abstraction while using ambiguous terminology such as respect and security aside, Martínez details a response to Nazchek published in Left Voice, wherein the authors point out oppression cannot be eliminated through simple economic reform alone. The authors explain that racism will not simply evaporate when economic conditions change. Quote, neither police bullets, nor ICE detention centers, nor the extra legal and customary forms of white supremacism can be made to disappear simply by winning wage increases and higher levels of unionization, end quote. They concede that not even a socialist transformation would be a silver bullet and point to prolonged struggle as the only means to achieve the end of racism. The authors also correctly identify Nazchek's suggestions as particular solutions for universal issues. Then there are leftists who outright deny the existence of class reductionism entirely. Adolph Reed, a political scientist at the University of Pennsylvania, has made the argument that, quote, class reductive leftism is a figment of the political imagination roused by those who have made their peace with neoliberalism, end quote. In the Tempest interview, Haider points out that such a response to liberal social politics is in itself absorption in them. He also counters this argument by explaining it assumes identity politics is a function of the existing social structure instead of something which exists in contradiction to it, and states that such a perspective is idealist in nature. Haider's conclusion is that material analysis is the best lens through which identity politics should be examined. Haider uses his neutralization thesis to differentiate between historic social movements and modern conceptions of multiculturalism within ruling class structures. He defines identity politics as, quote, the neutralization of movements against racial oppression. It is the ideology that emerged to appropriate this emancipatory legacy to serve the advancement of political and economic elites, end quote. Haider encourages leftists to embrace the complexity of these issues and advocates for the cultivation of dynamic understanding through materialist analysis. He explains race is a material relation which is inextricable from the economic, but not reducible to it. Haider deftly uses the example of police violence to illustrate his point, which I will now distill for the sake of time and concision. So it is true that poor people are disproportionately killed by police. So here we have a class factor. Additionally, Black people are disproportionately represented among the poor, which would also be a class factor. However, it is equally true that twice as many Black people are killed by police in general. This cannot be explained as a class factor and must be understood as a racial factor. Further, an analysis would also need to be conducted into why Black people are overrepresented among the poor, which would also have expressions as racial factors. These points highlight how the two causal factors, class and racial, work in tandem to create multi-layered systems of oppression. As Haider states, quote, understanding how race is a causal factor doesn't undermine class as a causal factor, but actually shows the specific social forms in which class happens, in which class is effective, in which the economic factor is effective. So the combined and thorough analysis of both the metaphysical and material allows for a deeper understanding of how these causalities interplay with one another, and leaves no room for reductionism in either analysis. So in conclusion, though tempting in their simplicity, reductionist approaches cannot fully address issues which exist in complexity. To completely overstate the point, a complex analysis is necessitated by the complexity of oppression. Capitalism has shown its stunning ability to adapt and evolve, so too must be our approach to fighting it. As Haider explains, quote, that's why capitalism can withstand social movements that challenge these other kinds of hierarchies. So we have to conceive of it in terms of its concrete specificity and in terms of its dynamic character, which accounts for its unfortunate persistence, end quote. We must be diligent in maintaining integrity in our perspectives, cultivating hegemony in our tradition, and being wary of the ever-present allure of simplicity and complacency. Our commitment must be to the daily tasks of organizing, sustained by ongoing, refined, and nuanced analysis of material conditions and the structures from which they emerge. Thank you.